There is a woman in Chinese history who is famous for two completely different things. One version says she was the courtesan who destroyed the Northern Song dynasty. The imperial patronage she received corrupted the emperor. She seduced the ruling class into decadence. When the Jurchen Jin army attacked, it was because the dynasty had already rotted from within, and she was the rot. The other version says she was a secret hero of the resistance. She ran an intelligence network. She passed military secrets to Yufei's army. She refused to serve the Jin invaders. She was the hidden patriot, the woman who fought back when every man in the court had surrendered. Both stories have been told for centuries. The truth is something neither version would like. She was a courtesan in Kaifeng. She wrote poems. She played music. She was known for her beauty and her intelligence. She lived in the most cosmopolitan city in the world in the 12th century. A city with a population of 1 million, more than any other city on earth. And she lived through the destruction of that city. The Jin army broke through the capital in 1127. The Emperor Huizong and the Emperor Qinzong were captured. Their wives, concubines, and daughters were taken as prisoners. The city was looted. The dynasty collapsed. And Li Shishi, the woman who lived in that city, who served tea to poets and drank wine with emperors, became a legend. Not one legend. Two. The truth is not a legend. It is quieter and far more revealing about how history treats women. Let me tell you about the real Li Shishi, the woman who existed before the legends began. The earliest reliable sources mention her in texts written during or just after the Northern Song dynasty. The Dream of Splendor, written by Meng Yuanlao, describes the city of Kaifeng in extraordinary detail. Its markets, its temples, its entertainers. Li Shishi is mentioned as one of the city's most celebrated courtesans. She was not a sex worker in the vulgar sense. A courtesan in the Song dynasty was a woman of considerable education, trained in poetry, calligraphy, music, and conversation. She was expected to be articulate, cultured, and witty. Her trade was intellectual and aesthetic companionship, not merely sexual service. Li Shishi was apparently exceptional even by those standards. Poets of the era wrote about her. The Emperor Huizong himself, famous for his love of art and music, and infamous as the last emperor of the Northern Song, visited her in disguise, meeting with her at night as if she were a scholar rather than a palace woman. One of the few contemporary accounts, written by Zhang Duani in his notes called Guerji, records a moment that may or may not be true, but is worth understanding. When the Emperor Huizong was captured by the Jin in 1127, and he was being transported north as a prisoner, he allegedly said, "When I lived in the world and was a man, I knew Li Shishi. Now that the state has collapsed, what face do I have to see her?" This single sentence tells you everything about who she was to the emperor. Not a concubine, not a political figure, but a woman whose personal judgment he apparently cared about enough to fear meeting her after the destruction of the empire. That is the real Li Shishi, as far as we can reconstruct her. Now let me tell you about the legends. The first legend begins in the years immediately after the fall of the Northern Song. As the Jin forces looted the capital, they supposedly sought out Li Shishi specifically. The Jin commander Wanyan Zonghan reportedly demanded her as a prize of war. According to one account, she was already dead by the time they arrived. According to another, she escaped. Some say she was smuggled out by a loyal courtier, others say she simply vanished. This legend made her a symbol of the Jin humiliation of the Song elite. She was the woman the enemy wanted, and that made her valuable. Even though there is no solid evidence that Wanyan Zonghan ever specifically demanded her. The second legend comes from the Yuan dynasty, some 200 years after her death. In Yuan dynasty opera and vernacular storytelling, Li Shishi becomes more than a symbol. She becomes a character in the resistance. According to these tales, she served as an intelligence operative, using her connections, her ability to move between the Song Palace, the court of officials, and the world of entertainers, to gather information for the Song resistance and for Yufei's army. Yufei, the most famous military commander of the Southern Song, is said to have used her as a secret agent. Some versions go further. Some say they were secretly married. Some say she passed military plans through her network of courtesans. Some say she deliberately misled the Jin commanders by feeding them false information. By the Ming dynasty, this legend has hardened into something almost official. In the novel Water Margin and subsequent retellings, Li Shishir appears as a character associated with the heroic resistance against foreign invaders. She is no longer just a courtesan, she is a patriot. By the Qing dynasty, she has become a literary symbol of loyalty and resistance. The woman who would not submit, the woman who fought back when every man in the court had surrendered. This is the second legend, Li Shishir as hero. But here is the question. Where did these legends come from? And why? Let me take you back to the actual fall of the Northern Song dynasty. The real causes of the Jingkong incident, the fall of Kaifeng in 1127, are well documented in the Song dynasty records, the Jin records, and the subsequent historical scholarship. The Northern Song dynasty had made a catastrophic strategic error, an alliance with the Jin against the Liao dynasty. In 1120, the Song and the Jin agreed to jointly destroy the Liao. The Jin conquered the Liao territories. Then, instead of honoring the agreement, the Jin turned on the Song. The Song military was structurally weak. The Emperor Huizong had focused on art, ritual, and religious ceremony rather than military preparation. The court was riddled with factional disputes. The generals who were trusted had been systematically undermined by political officials who feared military power would challenge civilian authority, a centuries-old pattern of Song dynasty governance. When the Jin attacked in 1125, the Song response was chaos. Emperors were captured. The city fell. The dynasty was overthrown. None of this involved Li Shishir. None of it had anything to do with a courtesan. The Song dynasty fell because of military miscalculation, political factionalism, and strategic blundering by men in power. But here is what the subsequent history needed: a symbolic explanation that could be turned in two completely different directions. If you are writing from a Confucian Orthodox perspective, you blame her for corruption. The emperor was distracted by women, and the dynasty fell. Simple moral lesson: guard against feminine influence. If you are writing from a patriotic resistance perspective, especially during the Yuan dynasty, when China was ruled by foreign Mongol conquerors, and the stories of Song resistance to the Jin were a form of cultural resistance, you need a hero. A woman who refused to submit. A patriotic figure who could inspire a conquered population. So Li Shishir became two things at once. She was blamed for the fall, and celebrated as its savior. She was the moral failure and the moral victory, the corrupting influence and the heroic resistance. All of this was invented. All of it was projected onto a woman who had no agency in any of it. Now let me tell you what the historical record actually says, or rather what it says we can know. The Song dynasty records, written by people who were there, mention Li Shishir as a real woman. They say she existed. They say she was a celebrated courtesan. They say she lived in Kaifeng. They do not say she ran an intelligence network. They do not say she was secretly married to Yu Fei. They do not say she passed military secrets to the resistance. These details appear later. In the Yuan dynasty. In the Ming dynasty. 200 to 500 years after her death. And there is a pattern to when they appear. The intelligence legend emerges during the Yuan dynasty, a time when Chinese scholars were writing stories of resistance against foreign rule, using the fall of the Northern Song as a template. Li Shishir becomes a vehicle for that resistance narrative. She is no longer a historical person, she is a symbol. The Yu Fei connection becomes firmly established in the Ming dynasty, a time when the story of Yu Fei's resistance against the Jin had become a central myth of Chinese patriotism, and every element of that myth needed to be made larger and more dramatic. A beautiful woman who sacrificed her life for the nation? Perfect. Add her to the story. The hero legend hardens in the Qing dynasty and beyond. Every era that needed a patriotic woman to point at. This is not history. This is mythology being layered onto history, century after century, with each layer adding more detail, more drama, and less contact with the actual woman who lived in Kaifeng. And yet, there is something important about Li Shishir that both legends obscure. She was a woman in a society that gave her no political power. She was a courtesan, a woman of the entertainment industry by all legal and social definitions, a subordinate class. She had no voice in the government. She had no military command. She had no political agency. And yet she became the central character in the story of the Northern Song dynasty's fall. She is blamed for a dynasty's destruction that she did not cause. and she is credited with a heroic resistance that she did not conduct. In both versions, she is made important in a way that no woman of her class and position could ever have been. In both versions, the actual causes of the collapse, strategic miscalculation, military weakness, political factionalism, are softened, reframed, and redirected toward her. One version says she destroyed the empire. The other says she saved it. The truth, she was neither. This is the final twist of the Li Shishi story, the one that makes her different from every other woman in this series. Emoshi was turned into a monster. She was blamed for a dynasty's fall. Baosi was turned into a monster. She was blamed for a dynasty's fall. Diao Chan was turned into a monster. She was blamed for a dynasty's fall. Chun Yuanyuan was turned into a villain and then a victim. She was blamed for an empire's betrayal. Yang Guifei was turned into a villain and then a victim. She was blamed for an empire's destruction. Li Shishi is different. She was turned into a hero. And that might be the more insidious transformation. Because when you turn a woman into a hero against her will, when you give her stories that she never asked for, when you attach legends to her name that she could never have known or approved of, you are still denying her agency. You are still deciding her story for her. You are still making her a character in a narrative that serves the needs of later writers, not her own needs as a person. The monster is a form of theft. The hero is a form of theft too. So here is what we know about Li Shishi. She was a woman who lived in Kaifeng, the most cosmopolitan city in the world in the 12th century. She was a courtesan, trained in poetry, music, and conversation. She was celebrated by poets and visited by an emperor. She lived through the catastrophic fall of the Northern Song dynasty in 1127. That is what we know. Everything else, the intelligence network, the secret marriage to Yufei, the heroic resistance to the Jin, is a later invention. Projection. A mythology built on top of her name for reasons that had nothing to do with her. She was neither the woman who destroyed a dynasty nor the woman who saved it. She was just a woman who lived through the collapse of a world. And history made her a legend either way.